Hello, everyone. My name is Malcolm Eastman, and today we're going to be going over VLANs using Cisco's packet tracer. So, what is a VLAN, right? So, VLANs stand for Virtual Local Area Network, right? And what VLANs allow us to do, they allow us to separate computers or endpoints on the same physical switch, right? So, a really, really good use for this is if we have multiple departments hooked up to one particular switch, we can now separate those departments by using VLANs, right? So, for instance, let's say we have VLAN 20, which would be IT here, and then let's say we have VLAN 10, which would be HR. We can separate those two departments, right? And give them the ability to communicate to each other, right? Using VLANs. And in this particular configuration, I'm just going to focus on creating the VLANs as well as giving them the ability to use route outside of their VLAN using a router, right? I'll set up a default gateway for each VLAN as well using this one router with two interfaces. Right. So again, as you can see here, I have VLAN 20 and VLAN 10. I have two computers for each, and they're both connected to the same switch. And I have one router here that I'm going to use as the default gateway for each VLAN. So each VLAN is going to get a router interface that's going to be used as their default gateway. So the first thing that I have to do is I have to go into the switch and create these VLANs. I've already taken the liberty of configuring all the IP addresses. So the only thing I have to do is open this up and go into the switch itself. So what I want to do, right, there's two ways you can configure to make a VLAN, right? One way is literally just typing in VLAN, so it's going to be 10. And now I'm now in the VLAN, right? I've created it. I can't add interfaces this way, but one thing I can do is I can actually change the name, right? So I said VLAN 10 was going to be IT, so I'm going to change the name to just IT, right? So that's one way you can configure the VLAN, right? In terms of making it, and then you can change the name. So you can change the name from here. There's only about like a couple of options you can do from here. Remote span, no. So I would like, if I wanted to get rid of the VLAN, I would put no VLAN 10 or whatever the number is. And I can change the name of the VLAN. And then I can obviously exit out. But I want to add the VLAN interfaces in. I want to add the interfaces into this VLAN. So the way I would do it, I know for VLAN 10, it's going to be F or fast Ethernet 0/1 to 2. Sorry, I forgot to put range. 0/1. So now I'm in the interfaces, right? So what I'm going to do is the command to add VLANs, so to add your interfaces into the VLAN, it'll be switch port access VLAN, and so for this instance, it would be 10, right? So let's exit out, and I want to see the VLAN. So I'm going to put do show VLAN. That's it. And it's going to show me VLAN 10, which is the name or number, and the name IT. It's active with these two interfaces in. Right? So that's it for VLAN 10. Now there's another way to create a VLAN without going through the VLAN configuration. What you could do is I would go again to interface range, and I know the other two for VLAN 20 is going to be FA 0/3 to 4. And I would just put switch port access VLAN 20. Now check out what happens. So it says access VLAN does not exist, creating VLAN 20. So it created the VLAN 20 when I put that command in, because since there was nothing there, it's like, okay, there's no VLAN 20 here, but you want to add these two interfaces to a VLAN 20, I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to create that VLAN, right? So now I'm going to hit exit, and I'm going to do again, do show VLAN. And now I see here VLAN 20 and the name and the two ports. I mean, the two ports that are associated with this VLAN, right? Let's change the name as well. So let's put VLAN 20 and then put name. And that's going to be HR, right? Let's just double check to make sure it changed it. So let's again do show VLAN. And it's changed it IT and HR, right? So let's get out of the switch for a second. So you've added both VLANs in, right? Now we need to configure the router. So the first thing we have to do is that we have to turn on both of these interfaces. So we're going to go into enable, and then we're going to head into our configuration terminal. And then what we're going to do, we're going to turn on our two interfaces because we won't be able to do anything if we don't turn them on. Oh, shut. They said they're both up. Let's take a look. And they are both on, right? So now they're both on. So now what we're going to do, we're going to configure each individual interface. And I want to put IP add. And I know for this one, it's going to be 192.10.10.1. And it's a WAC24 subnet mask. Right? So we're good there. And our next, we're going to exit out of here. And then we're going to do, again, we're going to do interface G0/0/1. And then we're going to put IP add 192.10.11.1 255 255.255.0, right? And then we're going to exit out of here again. And we're pretty much good with this configuration. Okay, so we've turned on our two router interfaces. We've added our IP addresses to the router. And we've also configured the VLANs on both switches. The next thing that we need to do is actually I want to add the gigabit interfaces to these two VLANs. So for VLAN 10, I want to add G0/0 to VLAN 10. And then I want to add interface G0/01 to VLAN 20, right? So what I'm going to do, go back into the switch. Alt-T. And I'm going to do interface G0/1. And I want to do switch port access VLAN 10 for this one. And then I want to go to G0 interface G0/2 and then switch port access VLAN 20. Let's check. Let's make sure we got it. We added the correct interfaces in. So let's put do show VLAN. And as you can see, the interfaces have been added here and here. As an IT professional, network professional, whatever discipline of IT you're in, you want to check your work. Every time you make a configuration, of some sort to any type of device, you want to make sure it went through correctly. So the show commands, for instance, in network topology, such as like, using Juniper devices or Cisco devices, you always want to make sure you're checking. So definitely use those show commands. Don't just assume it did it, just check it to make sure, right? So every time I make a configuration, I just click a show command, whether I'm in spanning tree or I'm using Ethernet channel, or for this instance, I'm doing VLANs, right? So the way we check that we did everything right is that we're going to try to ping these two, make sure that everybody can communicate to each other, right? I'm going to get out of here. So I'm going to go to PC2, and I'm going to open up the command prompt. And I'm just going to ping, I'm going to try to ping this, the PC1. So PC2 to PC1. And that's a 3. So I get a reply from PC1. So let's try to ping our default gateway for this particular interface for VLAN. Oh, I forgot ping, excuse me. And we also get a reply from our default gateway. Let's check on the other VLAN just to make sure. Again, I'm not going to assume since I got it on one side, it's going to work on the other side. I'm going to check. Let's get out of PC2 and let's go to PC4 this time. And let's go back again. Let's go to the command prompt. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to ping 192.10.11.2. And we get another reply. Now let's try to ping our default gateway for this router. Or sorry, for this VLAN. And we get a reply again, right? So again, make sure you're double checking, making sure you're going through the configuration. So let's go over what we did. This is a really, really simple, quick tutorial, but this is something that I think will get you kind of familiar with just creating the VLANs and assigning, the particular ports, the appropriate ports to that VLAN. So again, we had 2 different VLANs. We created them in 2 different ways, right? One way was literally just going into the configuration terminal for one and typing in VLAN 10, and it created it. And then from there, we were able to change the name, right? So again, if you want, I think that's also a good practice to make sure that you're changing the name of these VLANs, right? It makes everything easier to kind of understand when you're looking at it, especially when you're dealing with enterprise networks, or just maybe not even enterprise, just larger networks in general. It gets easier to understand everything that's involved with that network when things are labeled. So if I'm looking at VLANs and I see that all of these VLAN, all the computers in this particular VLAN are associated with the finance department. If I'm trying to troubleshoot computers and I go into the finance department, the physical department, I know that now I'm dealing with all the computers that are associated with this particular VLAN, because this VLAN has been named finance, this or IT or HR, right? It makes it simpler to troubleshoot. One of the things when we're creating networks and just IT systems in general, we want to think two things. Can I scale this up and can I scale this down effectively? And can I actually 3 things. Can I troubleshoot this network or a system? If you create a system where it's not easily scalable up or down, it might not be that good of a system, right? And if it's difficult to troubleshoot, then you really have a problem, right? Because one of the things about computers, they do tend to have, they have mishaps. It happens. I've dealt with plenty of computers, different types of devices, and it happens from anywhere from iPads to laptops to bigger computers to routers to switches, video game consoles. It happens. They tend to eventually start to have issues where you need to troubleshoot. If it's difficult to troubleshoot, it becomes a pain in the neck, right? So we really want to focus on creating systems that are able to be scalable up or down and troubleshoot them. Maybe not. Sometimes certain things are not easy to troubleshoot. We do have complex devices and technology nowadays, but we do want to be able to troubleshoot it. We want to be able to get to a solution eventually in a timely manner, especially when we're dealing with customer data, customer PII or their payment information. So we want to be able to troubleshoot these devices efficiently and quickly. Okay, so that's been a very simple configuration of VLANs, right? Again, I use two interfaces and I configure those two interfaces to be the default gateways for these two VLANs, right? Very simple. What I want to show you next is a different type of VLAN configuration, right? Oh, no, I don't want to see. Okay, so here we have a slightly different VLAN setup. We have three different VLANs, VLAN 10, VLAN 20, and VLAN 30. And we have one router with one interface, right? So this is going to be a VLAN configuration using router on a stick, or it's ROAS. Whenever you see ROAS, it stands for router on a stick, right? And I'm gonna get to that, what exactly router on a stick is once I get to the router side, right? Okay, so now everything's booted up. So again, this lab, only thing I've done, I've configured the VLANs, sorry, not the VLANs, I've configured the IP addresses for each VLAN. That's the only thing I've done, right? So let's start with making sure our VLANs are correct. So let's hop into switch one. We're going to do enable conf T. And so we're going to do interface, because I know it's F0/1, because there's only one computer attached to this switch and then one router. We're going to now put it into VLAN 10. Switch port, access VLAN 10. VLAN 10 doesn't exist, and it put it in. Now it created a VLAN again, like I said. VLAN 10 didn't exist on this switch, but since I put this command in, switch port access VLAN in the interface configuration, it created VLAN automatically. Now let's exit. I want to exit out of here. And the next thing I want to do again, I want to name it. Right? I want to name this VLAN. So I'm going to do VLAN 10 again. And this one is going to be HR. So name HR. And that's it. Now let's show. I want to see what I did, make sure my work was correct. Okay, let's take a look. All right, cool. VLAN 10 is named HR, and the correct ports are associated with this VLAN. Okay. Now let us head over to switch 2. Okay. Now switch 2. I know that this is F01, not for this particular switch. Oh no, it's just 3, sorry. So F01 and 2 are associated with VLAN 30. So again, we're going to do the same thing. Enter. I had enter a little too quick. But while we're waiting for that, I wanted to talk about another configuration we're going to need is trunk ports, right? So I have multiple VLANs in this lab. So I need to configure trunk ports. I'm going to need 2 trunk ports in particular, one on this interface to the router and one in between these 2 switches. Now, why do I need trunk ports? And why didn't I need them in the last VLAN lab, right? So the reason I need trunk ports in this particular instance is because I have multiple VLANs that are going to be talking through this interface. So I need to create a trunk port that will allow these different VLANs to communicate to each other from this one interface. And it's going to be the same thing on this interface here, right? So the reason I didn't need it in the other interface is because I didn't have an interface where multiple VLANs were going to be communicating through it. That one interface. I had one interface for each of the router interfaces for the default gateway for both VLANs, and I already had two different interfaces connected to each of those switches, right? Each of those endpoints. So there was two interfaces for two endpoints on one side, and then vice versa. There was two interfaces on the other side for the other two endpoints. So there was no need to create a trunk port because I didn't have any interface that would see traffic from multiple VLANs. But in this situation, I do need trunk port. So let's go back. Okay, cool. Enable comp T, and now I'm going to interface range, and it was F0A, F0A, F01 to 2. And now this one's going to be VLAN 30. So switch port access VLAN 30. Now it's created VLAN 30 for me. Now I'm going to exit out, and I need to do VLAN 20. So that's going to be interface FA0/3. And then again, this is going to be switch port access VLAN 20. Now it's created both of the VLANs, right? Now let's exit out. And we're going to name them. So VLAN 20 is going to be IT. And then VLAN 30 is going to be, let's say that it's going to be shipping. Let's double check our work. Do show VLAN. And I have the IT department and the shipping department both configured, and I have the two interfaces correct. Okay, wonderful. Now, let's talk about trunk ports again, right? As we configured them. Again, we need them because I got multiple VLANs using this one interface. So let's go into switch 1. And this one is going to be G02. Okay, cool. So now we're going to enable conf T, and we're going to do interface G0/2. And this command is going to be switch port mode trunk. That's it. Now I want to go on the other side and make sure. Let's go over here. So now I got an error message. It's telling me that there's an inconsistent port type because one is configured to trunk and the other one is configured to an access. So now, as you can see, it fixed itself. Why? Why did it fix itself and I didn't even get a chance to log in? Because it negotiated the trunk status. So I want to show that. Show interface trunk. So the reason it did that, so again, you saw I got that interface message, that error message saying, oh, there's an inconsistent port type configured on your switch. But here, G01, which is the trunk that I wanted, it configured it, right? And it configured it using mode auto. Right? And you see status is trunking, native VLAN, and you have the VLANs allowed on trunk, and then VLANs allowed and active in the management domain, right? So one thing I want to change, one thing about that I want to point out is the native VLAN right there. So when we have a trunk port, right, we can define what VLANs can communicate over that trunk port. The native VLAN is basically where our untagged traffic will go. So you see right here, it says where I have VLANs allowed 1 to 105, right? So I'm sorry, to 1005. What if I got traffic from a VLAN that's 1006, right? Let's just say. That traffic would be untagged, right? That traffic doesn't meet any of the VLANs that are allowed on this trunk. So it's going to be a native VLAN and it's going to head there. That's where that traffic is going to head. That's the untagged VLAN. You got to make sure you set that. And you always want to set that traffic, that VLAN, that native VLAN, to a VLAN that's not being used, right? So on this, I'm probably gonna do 1001 on this in a moment, and I'm gonna show you guys how to create that. So basically, what you would do, conf t, and again, we have to go into the interface. So it's gonna be G0/1. So I'm gonna do switch port trunk native VLAN, and I just put the number, right? And I have to do the same thing to the other side because I'm going to get an error message on the other side. So I'm going to get out of switch 2 and go to switch 1. See, and then here you go. Native VLAN mismatch right here. Let me open this up bigger. Native VLAN mismatch, right? So it's saying I got 1 on this one and 101 on the other one. I got to fix that. So support trunk native VLAN. Let's check our work. Do show VLAN. Oh, no, not VLAN, sorry. Do show interface trunk. And the native VLAN has been changed, right? I don't have to check the other side because they already told me here on this side, like, hey, the other side says 101. This side says 1. Got to fix this, right? And it tells you right here in big bold letters, native VLAN mismatch. Okay. So we've created our trunk, but we're not done. We want to make sure that all the appropriate VLANs can communicate over the trunk port. So here's the command. So we're going to do switch port trunk allowed VLAN, and you're going to put the VLAN. So it's going to be 10, 20, 30. Enter. Right? So I want to see, again, make sure I did it right. Do show interface trunk. So it says here, VLANs allowed on trunk, 10, 20, and 30, right? So we're good here for now. Let's exit out, and let's head to switch 2. On switch 2, let's make our way over here. Load this up. Conf T for our configuration terminal. And we are going to do interface G0/1, switch ports trunk allowed VLAN, and then 10, 20, 30. Check our work. Okay, so VLANs allowed and active in management domain is 20 and 30, and VLANs allowed on trunk 10, 20, and 30. So far, we have created our trunk port. It's trunking. We set our native VLAN for that untagged traffic, and then we've allowed the 2 VLANs, right? I'm sorry, we've allowed our VLANs. So if we look right here, it says VLANs allowed and active in management domain. You know, it has 10, 20 and 30. And then I want to show you on the other side what it says. Let's go over here. And I want to show you. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention. The reason I was putting do in front of the show commands like do show interface trunk is because when you're in configuration mode, if I just put show, it'll say this is wrong. We don't have this command here. So what you want to do is put do in front of it and it'll pull up the command. The reason you want to do that in configuration mode is because when you're making configurations to network devices, right? This gives you the ability to be quicker, more efficient. You don't have to keep dropping from one mode to the next. I don't have to go into drop down to enable, then go back up to configuration, then drop back down, and then I can just check it. I mean, but since I'm already in an exec mode, I don't have to put do. So I would just put show interface trunk. And here I see VLANs allowed and active in management domain. It only has 10 because 10's here, but I want to make sure that it can see 20 and 30. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into configuration mode again. And all I'm going to do is put VLAN 20, exit, VLAN 30, exit. Now again, let's take a look. Do show interface trunk. And now it sees all of them. And I want to do the exact same thing on the other side. Conf T. Now do VLAN, just 10, and exit. Now do show interface trunk. Okay. Okay, now that's it so far for our switches and our VLANs. Let's go over what we went through so far. So we've configured all of our VLANs, right? Our VLANs are now in their respective, they have their respective ports, right? We've created the VLANs, right? We have named them, as well as we have also created our trunk port, right? So this trunk port here, it's been allowed, it now has the allowed VLANs to now navigate. Now we have our router on a stick, right? So what we're gonna do, so if we remember from the previous video, or not from the previous video, but from our previous lab that we just did where we had two interfaces for each VLAN that served as their default gateway, we had two different interfaces. Here, we only have one interface. So your question probably is, how am I going to create a default gateway for three different VLANs using one interface, right? That's where router on the stick comes into play. And we're going to use sub interfaces, right? We're going to use sub interfaces. Before I can even do that, I need to turn on this interface, right? Because remember, our router's interface is down by default. So enable conf T. And now what we're going to do interface G0/0/0 no shut. Now I get a message saying it's up. Now, before I add all the sub interfaces to the router, I have to add one more trunk port. And that's this one right here, which this should be G0 to 1, right? Why I need to add a trunk port here? Because the traffic from all these different VLANs are going to travel to this router, because this is going to be everybody's default gateway, but on different sub interfaces. So I have to make sure that this interface can accept that traffic. So I got to create a trunk port here. So I'm going to go to enable, conf T, and then I'm going to do interface G0/1, switch port, mode, trunk, right? Now I need to do switch port, trunk, allowed VLAN, and I have to add all of them. That's 20, that's 30. So 10, 20, and 30. Also, I got to create a native VLAN. So switch port, trunk, native VLAN. And that was 1001. Now let's check our work. Do show interface trunk. Okay. So it sees all. So I'm looking at G02, encapsulation, the mode's on, trunking, and everything looks good here. Oh, and there's one thing I just want to make sure. I want to make sure that my switch ports are they're in the correct mode. So I want to make sure they're in access. So I'm going to go to conf T again, and I'm going to do interface F0/01. I'm just going to do switch port mode access because I want to make sure they're in access mode. Sometimes this is just something, a good rule of practice. I just want to make sure they're in access mode. So here again, I'm gonna go into here, do the same thing. Interface range is going to be FA0/1 to 3, switch port mode access. Again, I want to make double check. Okay. All right, let's go back here. So how do we make sub interfaces? So first, now that we have our interface on, we're going to go into enable, and we're going to go into configuration, and we're going to do interface G0/0/0.10. And as you can see here, we now have a sub interface created. So when we're creating router on a stick for VLANs, good rule of practice, I like my sub interfaces to match the VLAN that they're associated with. I think it's a good rule of practice. Again, like we previously spoke about, we want to make sure we're labeling everything, because when we have to troubleshoot, we know what this VLAN sub interface is, right? So we know where to look if there's a problem. We know what we may need to change, right? It makes our job very simple. It makes your job simple as a network professional, IT professional, and it makes it easier to, get everything back up and running, right? But it doesn't have to match. It's just a really good thing to do, right? Make things easier to understand. Okay. So our sub interface is up, right? So for this one, our default gateway is going to be IP add 192.10.10.1, and it's going to be 255.255.255.0. Let's take a look, make sure that's correct. Okay, that looks right. I'm going to hit enter. Oh, wait, I didn't put the encapsulation. So I have to change the encapsulation. So it's encapsulation.1Q. Now this number has to match the VLAN. So this is VLAN 10. This is going to be a 10. Now let's go back to IP add, and we're good to go, right? We have to make sure that encapsulation.1Q matches the VLAN, okay? So we're going to do the same thing again. Interface G0 0/0/0.20, because this is VLAN 20s. Encapsulation .1Q, and this is 20. Okay. Now we're going to go to VLAN 20 and we're going to add IP add for short for IP address 192.10.11.1 255.255.255.0. Enter. Now exit. Now we're going to go to the last one, interface G0/0/0.30 for VLAN 30. Encapsulation .1Q 30. Again, make sure that number matches the VLAN. IP add 192.10.12.1 255.255.255.0. Okay. Now, let's configure everything, right? So as we look here, we have these three sub interfaces connected, right? One for each VLAN and now all of their VLANs have been created. All the default gateways are now ready to go. Let's go over what we did one last time. Just made sure we put each VLAN on the switch. We created them, and then we put the appropriate interfaces in each VLAN. We named the VLAN. I really think it's a good practice to name your VLANs to kind of keep things organized, nice and neat. And you can kind of, again, when you have to reference it, when you have to troubleshoot, when you're looking to scale up or down this particular network, you know what this VLAN is associated with. We needed trunk ports. We had to configure 2 trunk ports. Trunk port from switch 1 to switch 2, and a trunk port from switch 1 to the router. Also, we also configured a router on a stick. We had to create 3 sub interfaces for all 3 of these VLANs, VLAN 10, VLAN 20, VLAN 30. The sub interface does not have to match the VLAN, but it's a good idea, again, to keep things organized, right? We want to be organized with our networks or just anything in IT. Organized is the way to go. Our encapsulation. So when we do encapsulation .1Q, we have to make sure that it matches the VLAN, right? Because that's what that interface is associated with, that particular VLAN, right? So we've configured. This was a little bit more of a in-depth setup of how to configure a VLAN, because again, this one was a little bit more because we only had 1 interface going to the router instead of 2, because with that previous VLAN setup, we had 2 interfaces, 1 for each VLAN. But this one, we only had 1. So I had to use sub interfaces as well as encapsulation to create a default gateway for each VLAN, and then we have the trunks. All right, so first thing I want to try, let's go to PC4, and I want to ping and make sure that I can ping. So first step, I'm going to try to ping the computer right next to me, which is 192.10.12, and that's a 2. I get a reply, right? Okay, so far, so good, right? Let's try to ping VLAN 20. 192.10.11.2. All right, let's see if we get a reply. All right, if we configured everything correctly, we should get a reply. Oh, and we do. We get a reply. So here, we did a little bit more. Again, it's a little bit more complex. I wouldn't say it was too difficult, but we had to do a little bit more because we only had 1 interface to configure to go from one switch to the other, then to go to the router, right? So again, this has been VLANs, right? I showed a pretty simple setup where we had two VLANs on the same switch with one router where I used two different interfaces for each of their default gateways. And then we have this one right here where we had three VLANs, two switches, but one interface going from one switch to the other switch, and one interface going from one switch one to the router one. And then we had to do router on a stick, which is basically where we configure sub interfaces, and those sub interfaces will serve as our default gateways for all of the VLANs. So again, this has been VLANs. Thank you for joining me. I really hope you learned something. I'm Malcolm Eastman. As always, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Malcolm Eastman, and you can also reach out to me on my email at malcolm@malcolmeastman.tech. Again, this has been a VLAN tutorial. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.